The moment you step into a medieval workshop, the first thing that hits you isn't the darkness or the dampness you might expect. It's the sound. Metal ringing against metal, wood creaking under pressure, water wheels groaning as they turn, and beneath it all, the constant murmur of human ingenuity at work. This isn't the silent, stagnant world of popular imagination. This is a place where minds sharper than any sword are reshaping reality one invention at a time. We've been told a lie about the Middle Ages. We've been fed stories of superstition and backwardness, of people cowering in the shadows of their own ignorance. But here's the truth that historians have been uncovering for decades. A truth that would make any modern engineer pause in respect. The medieval period wasn't just a bridge between the classical world and the Renaissance. It was an explosion of technological creativity that fundamentally transformed human civilization. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1347 in a monastery perched on a hillside in southern Germany. While most of Europe sleeps, a monk named Brother Heinrich stands before something that shouldn't exist yet. It's massive, complex, and it's about to change how humanity understands time itself. This is one of the first mechanical clocks, and it's not just a timepiece, it's a philosophical revolution, wrapped in gears and springs. You see, before this moment, time was fluid. It expanded and contracted with the seasons, with the length of days, with the subjective experience of those living through it. Sundials could mark the hours when the sun shone. Water clocks could measure intervals, but neither could provide the relentless mechanical precision of what Brother Heinrich was perfecting. This wasn't just about knowing when to pray, though that was the stated purpose. This was about imposing human order on divine chaos. The mechanism itself defies everything we assume about medieval capabilities. Imagine hundreds of precisely cut gears, each tooth shaped to mesh perfectly with its neighbors. The escapement mechanism, that brilliant innovation that allows energy to be released in controlled bursts, turning continuous force into discrete ticks. The weights and counterweights calculated with mathematical precision. This is engineering that wouldn't look out of place in a modern workshop, except it was being created by candlelight with tools we'd consider primitive. But here's what really matters. These clocks weren't just mechanical marvels. They were statements of human ambition. Each tick was a declaration that time could be captured, measured, controlled. They transformed how people thought about work, about prayer, about their very existence. Suddenly, being late wasn't just a social faux pas, it was measurable, quantifiable. The abstract became concrete, and society would never be the same. And this was just the beginning. While monks were revolutionizing time, farmers were revolutionizing the very earth beneath their feet. The heavy plow, that magnificent beast of wood and iron, was doing something that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. It was turning the heavy, clay-rich soils of northern Europe from obstacles into opportunities. Picture this scene. A morning mist clings to the fields of medieval France. A team of oxen, powerful and patient, stands ready. Behind them, attached by leather straps and wooden yokes, sits an invention that represents centuries of incremental improvement and sudden inspiration. The heavy plow. Not the simple scratch plows of antiquity that merely grooved the earth. This is a weapon of agricultural warfare, designed to wage battle against the stubborn soil. The coulter cuts deep, slicing through roots and compacted earth like a knife through flesh. Behind it, the plowshare lifts and turns the soil, exposing the dark, nutrient-rich earth below to air and sunlight. The mold board, that curved plate of wood reinforced with iron strips, doesn't just move dirt, it inverts it, buries the weeds, creates furrows that will channel water, aerates the soil in ways that transform its very chemistry. This isn't just farming. This is landscape architecture on a civilization scale. Fields that had lain fallow for want of proper cultivation suddenly become productive. Populations that had been limited by the carrying capacity of their land suddenly find they can support more souls. Villages become towns, towns become cities, and all because someone figured out how to turn dirt more efficiently. But the plow is just one star in a constellation of agricultural innovations. The three-field system emerges, a rotation that seems simple to us now but was revolutionary then. One field for winter crops, one for summer crops, one left fallow to recover. It's sustainable agriculture centuries before we coined the term. It's an understanding of soil chemistry developed through observation and experimentation, rather than scientific theory. And then there are the windmills. Oh, the windmills. If you want to see medieval engineering at its most audacious, look to these giants that began dotting the landscape. Not the picturesque Dutch windmills of later centuries, but their ancestors, raw and powerful and transformative. The first windmills in Europe appear in the 12th century, probably inspired by travelers' tales from the East. But European engineers don't just copy, they innovate. They take the basic concept of capturing wind power and they run with it, creating machines that are marvels of adaptation and efficiency. Stand before one of these early mills and try to comprehend the engineering challenge. You need to capture the invisible, unpredictable force of moving air and transform it into useful work. You need materials strong enough to withstand tremendous stresses, but light enough to turn. You need to understand gear ratios, mechanical advantage, the conversion of rotational motion into linear motion. You need to be part carpenter, part physicist, part madman. The post mill, that early design where the entire structure pivots to face the wind, is a masterpiece of practical engineering. The mill doesn't just grind grain, it becomes the heart of rural communities, a gathering place, a symbol of human mastery over nature. When those great sails turn, creaking and groaning, they're not just processing wheat. They're processing the very idea of what humans can achieve. But perhaps nowhere is medieval innovation more impressive than in the realm of warfare. Yes, warfare. That brutal necessity that has always driven technological advancement. The medieval period gives us innovations that are simultaneously terrible and brilliant, destructive and creative. The crossbow, refined and perfected during this period, is a case study in democratic technology. Here's a weapon that allows a peasant with minimal training to pierce the armor of a knight who spent his entire life preparing for battle. It's not just a weapon, it's a social equalizer, a political statement cast in wood and steel. The engineering of a medieval crossbow would impress any modern mechanical engineer. The prod, that curved piece of wood or composite material that stores the energy, must be strong enough to withstand tremendous forces yet flexible enough to bend without breaking. The trigger mechanism, the nut and pal system that holds and releases that energy, requires precision metalworking. The windlass or cranaquin used to draw the more powerful crossbows represents mechanical advantage applied to warfare. And then there's the trebuchet. If you want to see medieval engineering at its most spectacular, watch a trebuchet in action. This isn't just a catapult. This is applied physics, a demonstration of humanity's ability to harness the fundamental forces of the universe for decidedly practical purposes. The counterweight trebuchet, perfected in the medieval period, is elegantly simple in concept and devastatingly complex in execution. A massive weight, often several tons of stone or sand, falls. That gravitational potential energy transfers through a beam to a sling containing a projectile. The projectile flies, cities fall, history changes, but the devil, as always, is in the details. The The ratio between the short arm and the long arm of the beam must be precisely calculated. Too short, and you waste energy. Too long, and the mechanism becomes unwieldy. The angle of release must be exact. Too early, and your projectile plows into the ground. Too late, and it sails harmlessly over your target. The sling adds another layer of complexity, effectively extending the throwing arm and multiplying the velocity, but only if the release timing is perfect. Medieval engineers didn't have calculus. They didn't have computer simulations. They had observation, experimentation, and hard-won experience. They built these machines through trial and error, adjusting angles and weights and proportions until they could consistently put a 300-pound stone through a castle wall at 200 yards. But warfare technology isn't just about weapons. It's about protection, too. Medieval armor evolution is a fascinating arms race between offense and defense, each innovation spurring counter-innovation in an endless cycle of creativity. Early medieval armor is relatively simple. Mail, thousands of interlocking rings, provides flexible protection against cuts and thrusts. But as weapons improve, armor must evolve. Plates begin to appear, first as reinforcements at vulnerable points, then gradually expanding until, by the late medieval period, we see full plate armor that turns a man into a walking fortress. The engineering challenges are immense. The armor must be strong enough to stop weapons, yet light enough to allow movement. It must be articulated at every joint, allowing the full range of human motion while maintaining protection. Each piece must be shaped not just to fit the body, but to deflect blows, turning direct impacts into glancing ones. The metallurgy alone is remarkable. Medieval smiths developed techniques for differential hardening, making the outer surface of the armor harder to resist penetration while keeping the inner portion tougher to prevent shattering. They learned to work spring steel, creating pieces that can deform under impact and return to shape. They develop complex heat treatments, precise alloys, specialized tools, all without the benefit of modern science to explain why their techniques work. And then there's the infrastructure that makes all this possible. Medieval engineers don't just build weapons and tools. They reshape the very landscape of Europe. They build cathedrals that scrape the sky, bridges that span impossible distances, canal systems that turn rivers into highways. Consider the medieval bridge. Not the simple stone arch you might imagine, but the complex, multi-span structures that begin appearing across Europe. These aren't just ways to cross water. They're statements of human ambition rendered in stone and mortar. Building a bridge in the medieval period means understanding forces most people can't see. It means knowing how weight transfers through an arch, how water pressure affects foundations, how seasonal floods and winter ice will test your structure. It means developing construction techniques that allow you to build in the middle of a rushing river, creating temporary diversions and coffer dams with nothing but wood and human muscle. The bridge at Avignon started in the 12th century, originally stretched over 900 meters across the Rhone. 22 arches carried travelers and merchants across one of Europe's mightiest rivers. Each pier had to be sunk deep into the riverbed, fighting against currents that could sweep away workers and materials in an instant. The builders developed new techniques for underwater construction, new ways to pump out water, new methods for laying foundations that would last centuries. These bridges transform commerce. Suddenly, goods can flow freely across barriers that once required dangerous fords or expensive ferries. Cities grow where bridges cross. Trade routes shift. Entire economies reorganize themselves around these ribbons of stone that stitch the landscape together. But perhaps the most audacious medieval engineering happens in the cathedrals. These aren't just churches. They're experiments in the possible. ventures into architectural territory that shouldn't be achievable with medieval technology. Yet there they stand, defying gravity and expectation alike. The Gothic cathedral is perhaps the purest expression of medieval innovation. Everything about these structures pushes against the limits of what stone can do. The pointed arch, that simple yet revolutionary shape, allows weight to be channeled more efficiently than the round Roman arch. The flying buttress, that graceful external support, lets walls soar higher while growing thinner. The ribbed vault turns ceilings into delicate webs of stone that seem to float impossibly overhead. Stand inside Chartres or Notre Dame and try to imagine building it with medieval tools. No steel beams, no reinforced concrete, no power tools. Just stone and wood and iron and human ingenuity. The precision required is staggering. Each stone must be cut to exact specifications. Each column must be perfectly vertical. Each arch must have precisely the right curve. One mistake, one miscalculation, and tons of stone come crashing down. Yet they built them. Not just one or two, but hundreds across Europe. Each one a laboratory where master masons experimented with new techniques, pushed boundaries, learned from failures. The collapse of Beauvais Cathedral's choir in 1284 didn't stop cathedral building. It taught builders the limits they were approaching, helped them refine their calculations, improve their techniques. And the innovations weren't just structural. Medieval builders developed new tools, new machines, new ways of organizing labor. The treadwheel crane, powered by workers walking inside a giant wheel, could lift massive stones to dizzying heights. New surveying instruments allowed for more precise layouts. Improved scaffolding techniques made working at height safer and more efficient. The medieval construction site was a hub of innovation. Master craftsmen from across Europe would gather, sharing techniques, learning from each other, pushing their crafts forward. A master glazier from France might work alongside a stone carver from Germany and a carpenter from England, each bringing their own traditions and innovations to the project. Speaking of glass, here's another medieval innovation we rarely credit properly. Stained glass windows aren't just decoration. They're technological marvels that require understanding of chemistry, physics, and engineering. Medieval glaziers learned to add metallic oxides to molten glass to create colors. Copper for red, cobalt for blue, manganese for purple. They developed techniques for painting on glass with special pigments that would fuse with the surface when fired. But making colored glass is just the beginning. These massive windows must withstand wind and weather, while being held in place by nothing but lead strips and iron frames. The lead came system, those characteristic dark lines in stained glass windows, isn't just artistic. It's structural, allowing for thermal expansion and contraction, providing flexibility that prevents the glass from shattering as temperatures change. The windows tell stories, yes, but they also transform light into something almost mystical. Medieval engineers understood optics in practical, if not theoretical terms. They knew how different colors of glass would interact with sunlight at different times of day, creating an ever-changing display of light and shadow that turned stone interiors into otherworldly spaces. But let's step back from these grand projects and look at the quieter innovations that transformed daily life. The spinning wheel arrives in Europe during the medieval period, revolutionizing textile production. This simple device, probably introduced from the East, increases the speed of thread production by a factor of 10 or more. Suddenly, cloth becomes cheaper, more abundant. Fashion begins to democratize as even common people can afford multiple garments. The printing press may get all the glory, but medieval innovations in writing and bookmaking laid the groundwork. The codex replaces the scroll, making books easier to reference and store. Papermaking arrives from the Islamic world, providing a cheaper alternative to parchment. New inks are developed, more permanent and easier to produce. Scriptoriums develop efficient copying techniques, creating the intellectual infrastructure that makes the printing revolution possible. Medieval people innovate in chemistry without even knowing they're doing chemistry. They develop new dyes that create colors previously impossible to achieve. They refine techniques for making soap, turning what was once a luxury into something approaching a necessity. They perfect the distillation of alcohol, creating not just beverages but medical supplies and chemical reagents. The blast furnace emerges in the medieval period, allowing for higher temperatures and better quality iron. This isn't just an incremental improvement. It's a fundamental shift in metalworking capabilities. Suddenly, cast iron becomes possible, opening up entirely new categories of tools and construction techniques. The quality of steel improves dramatically, making better tools, better weapons, better everything. And speaking of metal, medieval innovations in mining are equally impressive. Water-powered pumps allow mines to go deeper. New surveying techniques help miners follow veins of ore more efficiently. Ventilation systems using interconnected shafts create air circulation in deep mines. Drainage tunnels, some extending for miles underground, turn flooded mines into productive operations. The medieval period sees the development of double-entry bookkeeping, that fundamental business innovation that makes modern commerce possible. Italian merchants, needing to track increasingly complex transactions, develop a system that revolutionizes how business is conducted. Suddenly, profit and loss can be calculated precisely. Businesses can scale beyond what a single person can keep in their head. Navigation improves dramatically during this period. The magnetic compass arrives from China, but European sailors refine it, develop new ways to use it, create the navigational techniques that will eventually enable the age of exploration. The astrolabe, inherited from the Islamic world, is improved and adapted. New map-making techniques emerge, more accurate and more useful for practical navigation. Medieval engineers even innovate in something as basic as heating. The chimney, believe it or not, is a medieval innovation. Before this, smoke from fires would simply filter out through holes in the roof or walls. The chimney creates draft, improves combustion, makes indoor fires more efficient and less smoky. It's a simple innovation that transforms how people live, especially in the colder parts of Europe. Water management sees huge advances. Medieval engineers don't just build mills. They create complex systems of channels, reservoirs, and sluices that control water with remarkable precision. They develop new techniques for drainage, turning marshland into productive agricultural areas. The Netherlands begins its long battle with the sea, using techniques developed during this period. Even something as mundane as the wheelbarrow is refined during the medieval period. The design that emerges, with the wheel at the front rather than the center, provides better leverage and balance. It's a small innovation that makes an enormous difference in construction and agriculture, allowing a single person to move loads that would otherwise require 2 or 3. The medieval period gives us the button. Yes, the button. Before this, clothes were held together with pins, laces, or simply wrapped and tied. The button and buttonhole combination allows for more fitted clothing, better protection from the elements, and new possibilities in fashion. It's a tiny innovation with enormous social implications. Medieval innovations in food preservation feed growing urban populations. Improved salting techniques, better understanding of smoking and drying, new methods for storing grain, all contribute to food security. The development of the guild system creates frameworks for passing on this knowledge, ensuring innovations aren't lost when their inventors die. The eyeglasses appear in the medieval period, probably in Italy in the late 13th century. This isn't just about helping people see better. It extends the productive life of scholars and craftsmen by decades. Suddenly, the accumulated wisdom of age doesn't have to retire when eyes grow dim. The social and intellectual implications are staggering. Medieval innovations even extend to music. New instruments are developed or refined. The pipe organ becomes a marvel of engineering with thousands of pipes, complex wind chests, and sophisticated key mechanisms. Musical notation evolves to allow more complex compositions to be recorded and transmitted. Polyphony emerges, creating harmonies that previous generations couldn't imagine. Universities emerge as centers of innovation during this period. They're not just places of learning, but laboratories where new ideas can be tested and refined. The university system itself is an innovation, creating structured ways to transmit knowledge and push the boundaries of understanding. Medieval scholars develop new mathematical techniques. Arabic numerals replace Roman numerals, making calculation far easier. The concept of zero, revolutionary in its implications, spreads through Europe. New geometric techniques emerge, essential for the architectural innovations we've discussed. Algebra arrives from the Islamic world and is adapted and extended. The medieval period sees innovations in law and governance that shape our modern world. The Magna Carta is just one example of medieval legal innovation. Common law emerges in England, creating a system of precedent and procedure that will influence legal systems worldwide. New forms of representation emerge, parliaments and assemblies that give voice to more than just the nobility. Medieval innovations in warfare extend beyond weapons to tactics and organization. The military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers create new models for organized, disciplined forces. New siege techniques emerge, complex operations requiring coordination of engineers, soldiers, and supply lines. The art of fortification advances in response, creating ever more sophisticated defensive structures. The very concept of the hospital as we know it emerges in the medieval period. Not just places for the dying, but institutions dedicated to healing, with specialized wards, trained staff, and systematic approaches to medical care. Medieval physicians may not have understood germs, but they understood the importance of cleanliness, rest, and proper nutrition in recovery. Medieval innovations in agriculture go beyond the plow. New crops are introduced and spread across Europe. New techniques for grafting fruit trees are developed. The horse collar, that seemingly simple device, revolutionizes agriculture by allowing horses to pull heavier loads without choking. Horses are faster than oxen, and this simple innovation dramatically increases agricultural productivity. Watermills become incredibly sophisticated during this period. They don't just grind grain, they power sawmills, creating standardized lumber for the first time. They operate fulling mills, mechanizing part of cloth production. They power bellows for forges, trip hammers for metalworking, pumps for mines. The medieval watermill is really a generalized power source applied to dozens of different industrial processes. The medieval period even sees innovations in what we might call social technology. The guild system creates ways to maintain quality standards, train apprentices, and support members in times of need. It's a form of social organization that ensures innovations are preserved and transmitted while providing social safety nets. Banking innovations during the medieval period lay groundwork for modern finance. Letters of credit allow merchants to transfer money without physically carrying coins. Early forms of insurance emerge, allowing merchants to share the risks of long-distance trade. The The Medici and other banking families developed techniques that make international commerce possible on unprecedented scales. Medieval innovations in art and architecture aren't just aesthetic. They develop new pigments that create colors impossible with natural materials alone. They perfect techniques for working bronze and brass, creating sculptures and decorative elements of extraordinary complexity. They develop new ways to work stone, allowing for increasingly delicate and complex carving. The medieval period sees the development of complex mechanical devices beyond clocks. Automata, mechanical figures that move and perform actions, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of gears, cams, and linkages. These aren't just toys, they're demonstrations of mechanical principles that will later be applied to industrial machinery. Medieval shipbuilding sees dramatic advances. The cog, that characteristic medieval ship design, incorporates innovations like the stern post rudder, more efficient than steering oars. Improved sail plans allow ships to sail closer to the wind. Better understanding of hull design creates ships that are both more seaworthy and more capacious. These innovations make possible the later age of exploration. The medieval period develops new techniques for land surveying and measurement. The rod and chain for measuring distances, the cross staff for measuring angles, new ways to establish levels and grades. These tools and techniques are essential for the large-scale engineering projects of the period, and they lay groundwork for modern surveying. Medieval innovations extend to the very concept of time. Not just mechanical clocks, but the idea of standardized time, of hours of equal length regardless of season. This conceptual shift, driven by the needs of monasteries and later by commerce, fundamentally changes how people think about and organize their lives. As we stand at the end of this journey through medieval innovation, what emerges is a picture radically different from the popular imagination. This wasn't a period of stagnation between classical antiquity and the Renaissance. It was a time of explosive creativity, of practical problem solving, of innovations that transformed every aspect of human life. The medieval innovators didn't have our scientific understanding, our materials, our tools, but they had something equally powerful, the conviction that problems could be solved, that the world could be reshaped by human ingenuity. They looked at challenges and saw opportunities. They took ideas from wherever they found them and made them better. Their innovations weren't just technical, they were social, economic, conceptual. They didn't just build better plows and mills and clocks. They built the foundations of the modern world. Every time we check the time, cross a bridge, or read a book, we're benefiting from medieval innovations. The legacy of medieval innovation surrounds us, hidden in plain sight. It's in the universities where we study, the financial systems that underpin our economy, the legal frameworks that govern our societies. It's in our conception of time as something precise and measurable, in our belief that technology can solve problems, in our understanding that knowledge can be systematized and transmitted. Perhaps most importantly, medieval innovators showed us that progress doesn't require perfect conditions. They worked with limited resources, incomplete understanding, and often active opposition. Yet they persevered, experimenting, failing, learning, and ultimately succeeding in ways that still inspire awe. The next time someone mentions the Dark Ages, remember the clockmaker adjusting gears by candlelight, the engineer calculating the curve of an arch, the farmer improving the design of a plow. Remember that innovation happens not in spite of challenges, but because of them. Remember that the medieval period, far from being a dark age, was a brilliant constellation of human creativity that still lights our way today. In the end, the story of medieval innovation is the story of human potential. It's proof that given problems to solve and the freedom to experiment, humans will innovate. They'll push boundaries, break limitations, and create solutions that transform the world. The medieval innovators did it with far less than we have today. Imagine what we might achieve if we approached our challenges with their combination of practicality, creativity, and sheer determination. The medieval world wasn't perfect. It had its darkness, its struggles, its limitations. But within those constraints, human ingenuity flourished. Engineers and craftsmen, scholars and farmers, all contributed to a great flowering of innovation that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate. They built our world, one invention at a time. And their greatest innovation might have been proving that such building is always possible, no matter how dark the age might seem. The story doesn't end there, not even close. We've only scratched the surface of medieval brilliance, and there's so much more hiding in the shadows of history, waiting to be illuminated. Let's talk about something that might surprise you: medieval environmental engineering. Yes, you heard that right. These supposedly backward people were managing landscapes with a sophistication that would impress modern ecologists. They weren't just living in nature. They were actively redesigning it to serve human needs while maintaining its productivity. Take the medieval fish pond or vivarium. Not some simple hole filled with water, but a carefully engineered ecosystem. Medieval estate managers created interconnected systems of ponds, each serving different purposes: breeding ponds for spawning, growing ponds for maturation, holding ponds for storage. They understood water temperature, oxygen levels, seasonal variations. They developed techniques for moving fish between ponds without stress, for maintaining water quality, for maximizing yields. These weren't hobby projects. Fish ponds were industrial operations that fed monasteries, castles, and towns. They required understanding of hydrology to maintain proper water flow, biology to manage fish populations, engineering to build dams and sluices that could control water levels precisely. Some monastery fish operations were so sophisticated they were essentially practicing aquaculture centuries before we gave it a name. And speaking of water management, let's dive deeper into the medieval obsession with controlling this most fundamental resource. The Cistercian monks, those white-robed innovators, didn't just pray, they engineered. At Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, they created a water system that would make a modern city planner weep with envy. Picture this: a river diverted through carefully calculated channels, water flowing through the monastery kitchens for cooking and cleaning, through the reredorer, yes, medieval toilets with running water, through the infirmary for the sick, through workshops for industrial processes. Each use carefully planned so that water quality appropriate to its purpose. Clean water for drinking and cooking, slightly used water for washing, and finally, wastewater carried away in covered sewers. This is integrated water management that many modern cities struggle to achieve. But the medieval mastery of water goes even further. In the Low Countries, they didn't just manage water. They declared war on the sea itself. The polders of medieval Holland represent one of humanity's most audacious engineering projects. Land below sea level, reclaimed and kept dry through an intricate system of dikes, drainage channels, and pumping stations powered by those iconic windmills. This wasn't just about creating farmland. It was about creating a whole new relationship between human civilization and the natural world. Every polder required constant vigilance, community cooperation, and technological innovation. The windmills had to run continuously, pumping water up and out. The dikes had to be maintained against the constant assault of tides and storms. One failure could doom entire communities. The social innovations required were as impressive as the technological ones. Water boards emerged, democratic institutions where landowners worked together to manage the complex systems that kept their lands dry. these weren't feudal hierarchies, but practical organizations where everyone's voice mattered because everyone's land was at risk. Medieval democracy, born from the necessity of fighting the sea. Now, let's venture into medieval medicine, another field where our preconceptions need serious revision. Yes, they believed in humors and bloodletting, but they also developed surgical techniques that wouldn't be out of place in a modern operating theater. Well, aside from the anesthesia. Medieval surgeons developed specialized instruments that reveal sophisticated understanding of anatomy and surgical principles. Bone saws with guides to ensure straight cuts, trepanation tools for drilling into skulls with minimal damage to surrounding tissue, cautery irons designed to seal blood vessels and prevent infection, needle holders for suturing that provided better control than fingers alone. The surgical manual of John of Ardern, written in the 14th century, describes procedures for treating anal fistulas that are remarkably similar to modern techniques. He understood the importance of cleanliness, used wine as an antiseptic, and developed instruments specifically designed for the procedure. His success rate was reportedly higher than many surgeons achieved centuries later. Medieval physicians also pioneered the use of anesthetics. Not modern anesthetics, but complex mixtures of herbs, including opium poppies, mandrake, and hemlock, that could render patients unconscious or at least insensible to pain. The spongia somnifera, or sleep sponge, was soaked in these preparations and held over the patient's nose. Dangerous? Absolutely. But it shows medieval medical practitioners actively seeking ways to reduce suffering. And in the realm of public health, medieval cities were far more sophisticated than we give them credit for. London, in the 14th century, had public latrines that connected to a sewer system. Not a perfect system, but a system nonetheless. Cities employed rakers to clean streets, gong farmers to empty cesspits, and passed increasingly complex regulations about waste disposal. Medieval quarantine practices during plague outbreaks show understanding of disease transmission even without knowledge of germs. The 40-day isolation period, where we get the word quarantine, was established through observation and experience. Port cities developed elaborate procedures for inspecting ships and isolating potentially infected passengers and cargo. But perhaps nowhere is medieval innovation more unexpectedly sophisticated than in the realm of optics. Medieval scholars didn't just preserve ancient knowledge about light and vision. They advanced it dramatically. Robert Grosseteste, in 13th century England, developed theories about light that prefigured later scientific understanding. He proposed that light was the fundamental force of the universe, that it behaved according to mathematical laws, that understanding light was key to understanding physical reality. His student, Roger Bacon, took these ideas even further. Bacon didn't just theorize, he experimented. He studied refraction, reflection, and magnification. He designed optical devices that could project images and magnify distant objects. He essentially described the telescope and microscope centuries before they were officially invented. His work was so advanced that later readers assumed it must be magical rather than scientific. Medieval innovations in optics had practical applications too. The reading stone, a hemisphere of glass placed on text to magnify it, evolved into spectacles. But medieval craftsmen didn't stop there. They experimented with different curvatures for different vision problems. They developed methods for grinding glass to precise specifications. They created frames from bone, wood, and metal that could hold lenses securely while being comfortable to wear. The impact was revolutionary. Suddenly, scholars could work decades longer. Craftsmen could continue precise work into old age. Knowledge could be preserved and transmitted by people who would otherwise have been forced to retire. It's hard to overstate how much this single innovation accelerated human progress. Speaking of acceleration, let's examine medieval innovations in transportation. The humble wheelbarrow we mentioned earlier was just the beginning. Medieval engineers developed sophisticated vehicles for specific purposes. The war wagon, essentially a mobile fortress, required innovations in suspension, steering, and structural design. These weren't just carts with armor bolted on, but carefully engineered vehicles that could withstand combat stresses while remaining maneuverable. The development of the pivoting front axle revolutionized wagon design. Previously, wagons could only travel in relatively straight lines. The pivoting axle allowed for much tighter turns, making wagons practical in narrow medieval streets and winding roads. Combined with improved harness designs that distributed weight more effectively, medieval wagons could carry heavier loads over longer distances than anything previously possible. Medieval shipwrights pushed maritime technology in fascinating directions. The development of the carrack in the late medieval period represented a synthesis of northern and southern European shipbuilding traditions. These ships combined the sturdy construction of northern cogs with the sophisticated sail plans of Mediterranean vessels. The result was a ship capable of both warfare and commerce, sturdy enough for Atlantic voyages yet maneuverable enough for combat. The innovation wasn't just in hull design. Medieval sailors developed the magnetic compass into a practical navigation tool, creating the compass rose and understanding magnetic variation. They improved celestial navigation techniques, creating more accurate astrolabes and cross-staffs. They developed the Portolan chart, a new type of map that showed coastal details with unprecedented accuracy, enabling safer navigation in dangerous waters. Medieval innovations in metallurgy deserve their own epic. The blast furnace didn't just make more iron, it made different iron. The higher temperatures achieved allowed for more complete reduction of iron ore, creating cast iron with different properties than wrought iron. Medieval smiths learned to control carbon content, creating different grades of steel for different purposes. But the real innovation was in understanding these differences and exploiting them. Spring steel for crossbow bolts that needed to flex without breaking. High carbon steel for sword edges that could hold razor sharpness. Low carbon iron for horseshoes that needed to be easily shaped. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was materials science developed through centuries of observation and experimentation. Medieval smiths also pioneered composite construction techniques. Pattern welding, often called Damascus steel, involved forging together different types of steel to create blades with superior properties. The patterns weren't just decorative. They revealed the internal structure that gave these weapons their legendary qualities. Some medieval swords show construction techniques so sophisticated that modern smiths struggle to reproduce them. The medieval period also saw innovations in chemistry that laid groundwork for later scientific revolution. Alchemists, often dismissed as mystics chasing impossible dreams, were actually conducting systematic investigations of matter. They developed distillation apparatus that could separate liquids by boiling point. They discovered numerous chemical compounds and reactions. They created systematic notation for recording experiments. The production of alcohol through distillation wasn't just about creating beverages. Medieval alchemists understood that alcohol was a powerful solvent that could extract active compounds from plants. This led to the development of tinctures and extracts that concentrated medicinal properties. The same techniques were used to create perfumes, preservatives, and industrial chemicals. Medieval dyers pushed chemistry in other directions. Creating color-fast dyes required understanding of mordants, chemicals that bind dyes to fabric. Different mordants produced different colors from the same dye material. Medieval dyers developed recipes of staggering complexity, some requiring dozens of steps and precise timing. The guild secrets of medieval dyers represent some of the earliest industrial chemistry. In the realm of food technology, medieval innovations went far beyond simple preservation. The development of hard cheeses that could last months or even years required precise understanding of fermentation, aging, and storage conditions. Medieval cheesemakers developed techniques for controlling moisture content, preventing unwanted bacterial growth, and encouraging beneficial aging processes. Medieval brewers transformed beer from a household product into an industrial one. Monasteries led the way, developing standardized recipes, quality control procedures, and scaling techniques. They discovered that hops not only added flavor, but acted as a preservative, enabling beer to be stored and transported. They developed methods for controlling fermentation temperature, crucial for consistent results. The medieval mill deserves revisiting because its impact went far beyond grinding grain. Medieval engineers developed specialized mills for every conceivable purpose. Fulling mills mechanized one of the most labor-intensive parts of cloth production. Tanning mills ground oak bark for leather production. Paper mills adapted from Chinese technology pounded rags into pulp. Each application required specific modifications, different gear ratios, different motion patterns. The overshot water wheel, perfected in the medieval period, was significantly more efficient than earlier designs. Water falling from above could extract more energy than water flowing beneath. Medieval engineers calculated optimal wheel diameters, bucket designs, and flow rates. They developed complex systems of dams and channels to ensure consistent water supply even during dry seasons. But perhaps the most impressive medieval mills were the tide mills. These ingenious devices trapped high-tide water in artificial ponds, then released it through mill wheels as the tide fell. This provided predictable power twice a day, regardless of rainfall or river flow. The engineering required was complex, calculating pond sizes, predicting tidal variations, building structures that could withstand the corrosive effects of salt water. Medieval innovations in textile production revolutionized clothing and commerce. The horizontal loom, improved throughout the medieval period, allowed for faster weaving of more complex patterns. The addition of foot pedals freed weavers' hands, increasing speed and enabling more intricate designs. The flying shuttle, a late medieval innovation, doubled weaving speed again. But the real revolution was in the organization of production. The putting out system, where merchants provided raw materials to home workers who returned finished products, created the first industrial supply chains. Quality control systems emerged, with guild marks guaranteeing standards. The cloth trade became so sophisticated that letters of credit from Flemish merchants were accepted from London to Constantinople. Medieval innovations in construction techniques enabled buildings of unprecedented scale and complexity. The development of the pointed arch wasn't just aesthetic, it was engineering genius. The pointed arch directs forces more efficiently than round arches, allowing for taller, thinner structures. Combined with flying buttresses, medieval builders could create stone structures that seemed to defy gravity. But the innovation went beyond design. Medieval builders developed new tools and techniques for working stone. The Lewis, an ingenious device for lifting heavy blocks, allowed precise placement of stones weighing tons. New drilling techniques enabled builders to create holes for iron clamps that held structures together. Improved mortar recipes created stronger bonds between stones. The organizational innovations were equally impressive. Medieval cathedral building required coordinating hundreds of workers over decades. Master builders developed sophisticated project management techniques. They created modular designs that could be built in sections. They developed standardized measurements and templates that enabled different teams to work independently while ensuring their work would fit together. Medieval innovations in warfare extended to logistics and organization. The military orders developed systems for supplying armies on campaign that wouldn't be out of place in modern military doctrine. They created supply depots, developed preserved foods specifically for military use, and established communication networks that could coordinate operations across continents. The medieval castle represents integrated defense technology at its finest. It wasn't just walls and towers, but a system designed to maximize defensive advantage. Every angle calculated to eliminate blind spots. Every gate designed to channel attackers into killing fields. Water supplies protected against siege. Food storage calculated to last months or years. The medieval castle was a machine for survival. Medieval innovations in agriculture went beyond tools to techniques. Selective breeding of crops and livestock accelerated during this period. Medieval farmers developed wheat varieties suited to local conditions. They bred cattle for specific purposes, some for milk, others for meat, others for pulling plows. They understood that characteristics could be passed from parent to offspring, even if they didn't understand the mechanism. The medieval garden was a site of constant experimentation. Monks and nobles alike tried growing exotic plants, developing techniques for protecting delicate species from harsh climates. The medieval greenhouse, using oiled cloth or thin sheets of horn instead of glass, enabled year-round cultivation of herbs and vegetables. Grafting techniques allowed multiple varieties of fruit on single trees. Medieval innovations in communication deserve recognition. Yes, most people were illiterate, but information still needed to flow. Town criers developed standardized calls that could communicate complex information to illiterate audiences. Church bells rang in patterns that conveyed different messages: fire, attack, celebration, death. Visual signals using flags and fires could transmit information across vast distances with surprising sophistication. The medieval period saw the development of diplomatic protocols and international law. Safe conduct passes, diplomatic immunity, and standardized treaty formats all emerged during this period. The medieval herald wasn't just a messenger, but a trained professional who understood protocol, precedents, and the complex web of relationships between noble houses. As we near the end of our journey through medieval innovation, it's worth reflecting on the mindset that made all this possible. Medieval innovators didn't see themselves as revolutionaries overturning the past. They saw themselves as problem solvers, improving and perfecting inherited traditions. This conservative approach paradoxically led to radical innovations as small improvements accumulated over generations. The guild system, often criticized for stifling innovation, actually provided a framework for systematic improvement. Masters were expected to contribute innovations to their craft. Apprentices learned not just techniques, but the principle of continuous improvement. Guild competitions pushed craftsmen to excel. The masterpiece wasn't just a test of skill, but a demonstration of innovation. Medieval scholasticism, with its emphasis on logical argument and systematic investigation, created an intellectual framework that supported technological innovation. The quaestio method, posing questions and systematically examining all possible answers, trained minds in analytical thinking. Universities became centers not just of learning, but of intellectual innovation. The medieval worldview, often characterized as narrow and superstitious, actually encouraged certain types of innovation. The belief that the natural world reflected divine order encouraged careful observation and mathematical investigation. The idea that humans could understand and improve God's creation provided motivation for technological advancement. Medieval innovations in social organization laid groundwork for modern institutions. Parliaments, universities, banks, insurance companies, and corporations all have medieval origins. These social technologies were as important as physical ones, creating frameworks for organizing human activity on unprecedented scales. As our exploration draws to a close, we must acknowledge that medieval innovation wasn't uniformly distributed. Cities innovated faster than countryside. Some regions embraced change while others resisted. Some innovations spread rapidly, while others remained local secrets for generations. But taken as a whole, the medieval period emerges as a time of remarkable creativity and progress. The legacy of medieval innovation extends far beyond specific technologies. Medieval innovators established principles that still guide us, that systematic observation leads to understanding, that small improvements accumulate into revolutionary changes, that sharing knowledge multiplies its impact, that practical problems deserve intellectual attention. They showed us that innovation doesn't require perfect conditions or complete understanding. It requires curiosity, persistence, and willingness to try. Medieval innovators worked within constraints that would paralyze modern engineers, yet they created solutions that still inspire admiration. The medieval period teaches us that human ingenuity finds a way. Given challenges, humans innovate. Given constraints, they create. Given problems, they solve. The specific technologies may become obsolete, but the spirit of innovation, that fundamental human drive to improve and create, transcends time. So, the next time you hear someone speak of the Dark Ages, remember the light of innovation that blazed throughout the medieval period. Remember the anonymous craftsmen who improved the plow, the monks who calculated the gears of clocks, the engineers who raised cathedrals to the sky. Remember that in every age, no matter how dark it may seem, human creativity finds a way to shine. The medieval legacy lives on not just in museums and history books, but in the fundamental assumption that tomorrow can be better than today, that problems can be solved, that human ingenuity can overcome any challenge. That belief, tested and proven in the crucible of medieval innovation, remains our greatest inheritance from those remarkable centuries.